I also want to, Gingerwalla, I want to pay my respects to the traditional owners here. To me, coming to Garma and coming up into this part of the world is like coming home. I've been coming here for years. My brother, John, has lived here for 20 years or more, and here and Beniala, and that's home country for me. I took my kids down there, and they went to school there in Beniala and that, so they get that experience for them. So when I and also I got, like all of you would have got the text last night in regard to our great storyteller as well, Archie Roach. My first experience with him was when he came to Dubbo, and him and Ruby, and if you know, they were incredible, amazing people, so relaxed, so laid back. If they're so any more laid back, they'd be doing somersaults, and they were so loving, and how they talked to people, didn't matter who they were, black, white, green, pink, purple. They were just wonderful people. He was a gentleman, really like those old gentlemen I knew as I was growing up, and Ruby was a really special person, a lady, a really magnificent woman. And now they're together. That's good, and the pain's all over. They're in their spirits together. You know, when you saw them two together, you'd be very hard pressed to see a more loving a couple. Oh, except for me and my wife over there, and yes. But they were just beautiful people. So it is sad for us that we have lost him, but we have not lost him. His spirit, his wisdom, and his songs, and that will be with us forever. So, my thoughts about yesterday, and I got to say, like, I've known Anthony Albanese 30 years, must be 30 years, and we were in the Labor Party together, and I was in the right wing, he was the left wing, so we used to be always punching it out at conferences and everything like that. And I've got to say, a real personal thing, he has grown. He has grown enormously, and I see him now, the way he talks, the way he acts, the way he does things is like that person I met 30 years ago. It's just a different person. You know, you get some people who are able to, they get chosen to be leaders. Some people get up and succeed. If you would have asked me, I'll be quite honest, he was going to be Prime Minister in 5 years' time, I would have probably laughed at you. But he has stepped up. He has stepped up into that position. Some people may have knocked him for going overseas. I don't. He's really done an amazing job on the international stage, and it's a job that had to be done. It's a job that we had to show that Australia was back on the stage and back to contribute and be a partner and a friend. And yesterday, I saw him step up a little bit further. He gave an amazing speech. I find it, even if you, like I did 30 years ago, didn't like him, even if you didn't like him, you had... I feel like I'm in confessions here. And you didn't like him, he stepped up again yesterday and he gave an amazing speech, and it was just brilliant. So people asked me, so it was brilliant. You know, you could not really argue with some of the words, which makes it difficult for me here today, because one of the things I have as a concern, because I'm a Mundine, we come from Bayugal and Stewart Island up on the north coast of New South Wales. That's our country. I'm a very strong believer in country. You know, I love this saying at the front of the news: I speak for my country. And for too long, people have been ignoring what countrymen. And I'll give you a couple of examples. One is people know that I'm a very strong supporter of nuclear power, because I believe in climate change. I believe in what we're doing at the moment by going back to fossil fuels, and that is bad. So I believe in it. So when the Jawan people, the people of Ranger Mine, decided they didn't want to do mining anymore, they wanted no part of the game anymore, all the Sydney media come to me and said, what, because I thought they'd have a fight. I said, and I said, no, I agree with them. And they said, but you like nuclear power in it? And I said, yes, I do. But That's their country. People fight for country. I'm not their countryman. They make their own decisions, and I will always support countrymen speaking for country. My concerns is in regard to the voice, the Parliament, is the details of that. And some people say, oh, yeah, but there are details. Well, I've read the Garma, the Marcia Langton report. I didn't agree with it. To me, it was too large. It was too bureaucratic. I've been through this all the time. I want something where the countrymen have their voice. So I wrote an article, if you want to look up online in 2017 for the Australian Financial Review, about my views and about the voices for countrymen and countrywomen to the politicians and the parliaments and how they should be doing that. And that's what I focus on. I've always focused on this. I don't like these big committees and big things that go down to Canberra. And, in fact, when I go to Canberra, I'm tripping over blackfellas all over the place, down there talking. And I've always been very strong about getting Torres Strait Islanders and Aboriginals into Parliament, and we're getting there. We're at 5% of the federal parliament, but not only that, we're all in state and territory parliaments across the country. I believe that will grow. In fact, my prediction is in the next 10 years, you'll probably see about 20% of the parliament that, because you're getting people, as I was on Friday with the education programs and that here, you're getting people who are connected back to their country, who are talking for their people, and they're being very educated in the Dugai world, Ballanda world, and they are able to get our voices into that parliament. I've seen too many times with some of these programs that you've seen ADSIC, you've seen a whole wide range of things. I actually was a supporter of ADSIC at the regional level. Of course, you had the local people. I wasn't too crazy about the national level because we had serious problems there, but anyway, that's what happened. My thing is that there are a few questions that need to be answered, and I'm happy to raise those questions because and listen, because I'm a man who likes to listen. People talk about listening and talking. I like to listen, and the blackfella way, you observe. You see what's going on as well. You see what the country's doing, you do it. So you listen, observe, and then you have a discussion. So I'm going to be doing that today. I'm not convinced about it. The questions I have, we could do this by legislation. Why do we need to have it in the Constitution? Because when you have things in the Constitution and it doesn't work, how are you going to get it out? So how are you going to change things? And so my thing is, why don't we, you get to legislate, you can test it, you can iron out some of the problems, and you can go from there. So, but my big thing is, people have to convince me about a couple of things. One is why it has to be in the Constitution. How do country men and women really get their voice heard? Because that's this culture. Our culture as Aboriginal people is only country men and women can talk for country and make decisions about country. I can't talk for their country, I only can talk for my country. And so I want to know how that's going to happen and what it's going to do and how it's going to be in place, and I want to see how it deals with the whole lot of issues that we have in our communities. Prior to COVID, I used to spend 3 days a week in our communities across the country: Western Australia, Northern Territory, South Australia, Victoria, Queensland, and that. And I'd listen to get my thoughts. And I seen the problems, and I seen the great stuff that's been done, because not all these communities are bad, as some people in the media paint it. Some of these communities are just fantastic, but we can't ignore the problems, and we can't ignore the things that need to be done to move forward. And I'd like to know how are they going to do that before I'm ever going to sign up for this, because I've seen it too many times. I've seen it too many times fail. I've heard the best, most beautiful words ever, and the words said yesterday were beautiful words. I'm not going to be critical of that speech. They were beautiful and wonderful words. But I've got to be convinced about this. And I'm not the only one. Black, white, Brindle, Aboriginals, everyone, they pulled me up and they talked. I said, what is this? What is it about? So I'm, unlike the Prime Minister said yesterday, we'll discuss that after we put it in the Constitution. I want to discuss it before the Constitution. Thank you.
Oh, sorry.
You've been volunteered.
Yeah, I wasn't watching. For those who are aware, my name's Geoff Scott. I'm a Wiradjuri man from Western New South Wales, a bit further west than Warren. It's pretty sparring in Dubbo. But I'd like to acknowledge the Gummuch and the Yolngu people for our warm welcome here today, and also acknowledge the loss we suffered last night. But in the terms of this one, I thought the Prime Minister's speech yesterday was a fantastic acknowledgement of where Australia's going to, a sign that the nation was maturing. And his victory speech, the first thing he mentioned was support for the restatement. When he opened Parliament, the first thing he mentioned was support for the restatement. And he came up here yesterday and provided that speech, which responded to many of the naysayers and the conditions about detail. And he provided that detail. He even mentioned the points about you can do two things at once, you know. You can address all the many issues that face Aboriginal people around the country, and you can get a voice in place. I was involved in the 2016-17 regional dialogues and national convention. What we heard unanimously in those meetings was the fact that we'd lost our voice. We wanted the power back. And one of the words in the Uluru Statement is the torment of the powerlessness. It's one of the key factors in poverty. If you don't have a voice, people say get up and do things yourself. You need a voice. And part of this whole folk process here is to give that voice back. So I thought it was an amazing speech. And he's really set a course now for the country to actually mature, recognise Aboriginal people in the rightful place in the Constitution. That's the heart. And to address the practical measures that need to be done to make up those differences. There's a real focus now on closing the gaps targets redone. We've had 10 years of failure on those. I hope the next round is a bit better. But anyone who thinks spending, well, depending on who you quote, between $20 and $30 billion a year in Aboriginal affairs with little result, I don't think any fair-minded Australian would agree that's a good outcome. Certainly Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people don't think it's a good outcome. And it's an indictment on all of us that we let that persist for 3-4 decades. This is about giving Aboriginal people on the ground their voice back so they can actually provide some real on-the-ground advice and support about what their priorities are, what their issues are on the ground. And we heard from many speakers yesterday that that's what they wanted. On Q&A last night, the same issue was there. They addressed the question about this can be done and it can be done now. In terms of ATSIC it had its problems. It should not have been abolished. And for those, a good memory is sometimes not a good thing, but it was a Labor opposition leader who agreed to abolish ATSIC, and then bipartisanship we lost again. So we're watching that very carefully. But it's time for the voice to come back, and again I said I thought ATSIC was a very good organisation that needed tweaking, focus on it. I mean, ATSIC was on the verge of becoming establishing regional authorities before it was cut. So there are many aspects which give me great hope that the Prime Minister mapped us out in the path today, which is the right one. And I don't think it's about left and right of politics. It's about right and wrong. You're on the right side of history or the wrong side of history. That's the choice you make here. I can make many other comments, but we had 5, so I'll try and leave it there. Thank you.
Thanks, Scotty. My name is Shaun Gordon. I'd too like to acknowledge country, pay my respects to the Yolngu people, and also pay my respects to Archie Roach, who has played a significant role in my life in just listening to his music. And if we want to gain a true understanding of the challenges facing Indigenous people in this country, I'd encourage you to go and listen to Archie Roach and the songs, because he's probably best captured in his music the challenges our people have faced over the many years. I sit here, I guess, I have many roles, but one of the roles that I play is I lead an organisation called Uphold and Recognise, and we've been working in the constitutional space for quite a number of years now. And our work is mainly focused on bringing Conservatives on the journey of Indigenous constitutional recognition. And I can tell you I've had lots of conversations with various Prime Ministers over the years, and flew up here when Tony Abbott was working up here to meet with him when he was doing his time up here to have a conversation exactly about Indigenous constitutional recognition and what it means. And you know, it is unfortunate that the coalition government couldn't take the lead on this and really step up and drive change on something that Indigenous people have been asking for decades, not since the Uluru Statement, but we've been asking for this for decades. And so to hear a Prime Minister, as Warren said at his maiden speech after winning the election, clearly state his support for Indigenous constitutional recognition, then at the opening of Parliament and then here again yesterday, gives me hope that finally we've got a leader who's willing to stand up, put a flag in the ground and says this is what we need to do as a country. I guess when we talk about the why we need to do it, it's quite simple in my head as to why we need to do it. One is that we can't have a founding document that not recognise the first people of this country, people who have lived in the country for more than 60,000 years, and for those people not to have a position within the founding document. That's a blight on the country, and it's a blight on us as a nation to think that that's acceptable. So that is simply the very first position, that it is the right thing to do to recognise the original people of this land. The second is that if we look at the many structures that have been developed over the years to give Indigenous people a voice, those structures have been changed and wiped out with the whim of changing governments. And that's consistent in our communities across the board. Every term, every 4 years, policies change, community programs change, funding changes, and our communities are continually having to change and adapt. And without that consistency of programs that last longer than 4 years, and funding that lasts longer than 4 years, and policy that has consistent input from Indigenous people, we can't expect that things are going to change in communities. We can't expect people who are meant to be there as enablers, pretending to be the doers, which are government agencies and bureaucrats. They're not the doers. They are enablers. Government agencies and bureaucrats don't live in your life and don't operate in your life. But I can tell you, in Indigenous communities, they are well and truly embedded in Indigenous people's lives. They have a role to play as enablers. They need to step back, allow Indigenous people to step up and take responsibilities for the things that belong to us, and they need to be able to support that. And right now it's very difficult for our people to step into those roles because government have been occupying them for far too long. I'm fortunate enough that I led the development of the Empowered Communities work for 6 years, which we launched here in Garma back in 2013. Leading that work took me into 8 communities around the country, communities advocating for the establishment of a voice and a say in policies, programs and funding to be able to drive change within their communities. I'm also fortunate enough to be the independent chair for the Barkly Regional Deal in Tennant Creek, which is an $84.7 million government investment in infrastructure to help drive social change in that community. But unfortunately, community are at the table, but they're not at there putting forward their priorities as to what it is they want as community to help address some of the challenges that they're experiencing in their communities. And so hearing what the Prime Minister says and how it works on the ground, to Warren's point, it absolutely has to work on the ground. It has to be a voice that is led and developed by local people. Those local people have to be empowered to set their own development agendas, their first priorities as to what they want to achieve within those communities. And where there are blockages, and there will always be blockages, when you're dealing with government, there will always be blockages in the system. But we do need a voice that can help unblock those systems, can help inform government on policies, on programs, on funding to ensure that we get the best outcome. As Geoff said, that we spend $36 billion annually in the name of Indigenous affairs. $6 billion directly goes towards Aboriginal programs. But by the time we get down to the communities, there's a small percentage of those funds getting to communities, and the communities have very little say on how what those funds are to be used for and what those funds can do. And so this is about us taking control of our own lives. The Prime Minister set an agenda clearly yesterday about them stepping back and becoming enablers to support Indigenous people in their right to develop culturally, socially and economically. There were comments yesterday, and I sat in the Gulkula session yesterday, and I really want to congratulate them on their development and how they've managed to develop culturally, socially and economically for their people. But there's also an assumption that because the Gulkula have done that other communities should be able to do it. What I can tell you is communities aren't starting from the same starting blocks. Communities have had different challenges, they've had different interactions from first contact all the way up until now. My community, the Wonkamara people, our first contact was in 1864. And then my people were forcibly removed from their country and moved to other countries, forced to not speak their languages. These are real realities of our history, and we have to understand that we're not starting from the same starting blocks. The best analogy I use, if you look at Kathy Freeman and you watch some of the Stalwart Gifts, she's starting on a 50-metre marker. She manages to win both of those races back in, I think it was 2008, 2009. She manages to win both of those races, but she started from a 50-metre marker. Some of our communities are starting further back. We've got to work with them to be able to give them a voice, and I'll give you the best example I've seen, and I haven't got to come to remote communities to understand how disempowered and how disenfranchised our people are. I did work with the community out at Western Sydney that was establishing a local decision-making structure. And I was going in to work with that community on strategic development around how they set their agenda and how they set their governance structures. I ended up working with that community for 3 months to work with them on just how to make a decision. Just one decision. It took me 3 months to work with them on how to make a decision, accept that decision and move on to the next decision. And that reinforced to me just how much governments have taken control of our people's lives, is that here's a community, the biggest Aboriginal community in the country, sitting in the biggest capital city in the country, have been so disempowered that it took 3 months to work with that community to make a decision that was in the best interest for them. And their fear was getting the decision wrong and the impact that might have on them into the future. And that's why a voice is needed, because our people need to be empowered to make decisions, accept the decision that they make, and also accept that it may not necessarily be the right decision, that we can make mistakes, we can learn from those mistakes, and we can make the next decision to be able to move on from that. And so this is about addressing the disempowerment and disparity gap that exists in our community. The Prime Minister yesterday drew a line in the sand. That line in the sand is what I'll go away and work with Uphold and Recognise on, and I'll continue to go away and have the conversations on the right around gaining their support. But at the end of the day, I want to acknowledge the Prime Minister, I want to acknowledge Linda Burney, the Minister, and Senator Patrick Dodson for their leadership within their party, for finally taking a stand on this. Thank you.
Morning. Saving the best to last, obviously. Also the youngest, you know.
We worked out. We threw these two old guys over that side.
As always, I would like to acknowledge the Yolngu for allowing us to be on their country. It's always incredible to come to Garma and to see the incredible leadership that they showcase to us and the incredible ambition that they have. And always thank you for having us. To Julpi, Archie, thank you for all of his legacy that he's left us. Julpi is our word for old man, so, he's an incredible legacy for all of us. I've been a part of the Uluru Statement from the regional dialogues when I was asked to come along to it in Ross River, and I went and I was like, I don't know what I'm doing here. And it was incredible to be a part of it, and it would really showcase the conversations that we needed to have, because they kept talking about Congress, the National Congress, and I thought it was the Alice Springs Health Service. So that shows you what it means when you have government organisations or Aboriginal bodies where it doesn't hit the remote communities. Now, I'm a very privileged Aboriginal woman in the fact that I have my language and culture. I live on my country, not right now, but I used to. So, I have my cultural connections. But also I have the language ability to walk in the Western world that my family doesn't have. They sit in that places of disadvantage. So I know the importance of the voice and why that can change our lives, because time and time again we see policies brought out to our communities and we've had no consultation with it. Or when we've wanted to our own organisation, we want to do something for our communities, we have to go through a government loophole, which is, sometimes it's empowered communities. We have to talk to them to make sure that we're okay to get that government funding. Or, if in the art space, you have to go through the Indigenous Art Code of Conduct, which doesn't support us. But what I loved about the Prime Minister's speech yesterday was that was essentially all the work that we've been doing in the Uluru Statement for the past 5 years, having the conversation, doing it. And so for him to put that line in the sand, it was amazing. But I also look at it and go, that's the line in the sand for all of you. Because let's think back to the Uluru Statement. It was gifted to all Australians. It wasn't gifted to just the parliamentarians or the ministers or the House. It was gifted to all Australians to say, this is what we're giving to you. If you work with us, we'll have a better Australia. So you have to remember that gift sits with you, and it's about what your leadership can do. How are you going to take that challenge on? How are you going to utilise your voice, your privileges that you have, that we as Aboriginal people don't have to the same degree? How are you going to utilise that for our communities? How are you going to utilise that for the communities that don't have the services that others do, as Shaun was just talking about? Our communities are vastly different. I'm in the desert. I'm struggling with the humidity, but that's okay. But I'm from the desert. Our communities are different. We have different needs that we know about. But I can honestly tell you, I'm over the elements of government saying, you know what? All Aboriginal communities look like this, and we're going to do the stock standard one shoe fits all. Because that's what it is. And that's what we've heard at Uluru. That's what we heard time and time again about why don't they understand that all of our communities are different. There's a myth that all Aboriginal people are the same. All Aboriginal communities are the same. It's not. There is this richness and there is devastation in all different degrees in our communities. But it's utilising what is now the line in the sand and how do we go forward. We can talk about all the data, the details, the meat on the bones, what does that look like? But we need to be recognised in this Constitution. It is our birthright to be recognised in it. We need the power to have a voice at the table. We're forever on the menu when it comes to this country. Whenever government wants to change the direction of whatever something's going on in their personal life, let's just change the one word in the Australian anthem to include us. Sorry, what? Let us be at the table to have a meaningful discussion about what we need in the community. Let us have a voice for that. And then it's the Makarrata, that commission talking about the treaty processes. I find it really scary when people talk about treaty. Let's do treaty like this, like treaty right now. We need to sit down and have, as Shaun just said, it takes 3 months for one community to have a discussion about one thing. We need to look at our communities, all of them, and have a proper, concise conversation about treaty that is separate from government changing every 3 years. And, everyone goes into caretaker mode when it goes into election periods. So it's all of that. So let's be really honest about it. We can't keep starting that again every 3 years. So that treaty conversation has to be done properly, you know? And then this truth-telling element, I'm sorry, but I don't want to see truth through a Western lens anymore. It has to come from our communities. And how are you going to do that if we don't have a voice at the table? So again, you know, it was incredible. That was what the Prime Minister was saying was amazing. But I bring it back to you, because we elect these ministers. We elect those in power, you know, but we forget, you know, we think that our civic responsibilities finish on election day. It actually doesn't. Every day we have a responsibility to talk up. Every day we have a responsibility to say no more. Why do we still have detention centres? Why are we so bad in climate change? Why have we allowed our government to sit in a place of complacency? You know, our Aboriginal leaders constantly, these three gentlemen I'm up here with, they constantly showed and led. You know, we always lean in, we always push through. We get debated about, we get pushed back about, but we're always leaning in. So I put it back to you. I'm putting the mirror back to all of you here, to what are you going to do? How are you going to use your privileges? How are you going to use the voice that you have to give us a voice? Thank you.